Idris Elba and Kate Winslet, two young professionals, or middle-aged professionals. Well, in comparison with me, young professionals, both trying to get somewhere, both stuck in a snowstorm. So you think it's going to turn into planes, trains and automobiles. She is a photojournalist. I think she says she works for The Guardian. He is a surgeon. She needs to get to her wedding. He needs to get to an operation, which is waiting to happen. Storm comes in. None of them can get flights. They overhear each other both saying, they can't get any hire cars because all the hire cars have gone. And she says, look, I've got an idea. She goes out onto the tarmac into a sort of local aircraft hangar, and there is Beau Bridges with a twin engine plane. She says, "Can you fly?" She says, "Yeah, I can fly. It's fine. The storm isn't coming in yet, and it'll be absolutely fine. We can get ahead of it." They get into the plane. She says, "Have you filed a flight plan?" He says, "No, there's no need. We're in daylight." Never a good sign.
No.
Whilst they are up in the air over the snow-capped mountains of Utah, he is suddenly taken ill, and the plane plummets into the side of the mountain, leaving two strangers stranded in the middle of nowhere. No record of where they've gone, no phone signal, no food, and apparently nothing in common.
I have some Advil. Are you okay?
A couple of bruises, a few scratches, a couple of cracked ribs. I'm okay. I got lucky.
Pilot. He didn't file a flight plan.
No. No, but there was radio contact.
How long's it been?
36 hours. I've got plenty of water as long as we can melt the snow. Got 4 packets of almonds, a couple of candy bars, half-eaten sandwich, and some cookies.
What kind of cookies?
What?
Joke.
And one of the things I love about that clip is he says sandwich. He very, very clearly says sandwich. I haven't heard somebody say sandwich in a very long time.
What is the significance of that?
Well, it's just because, it's sandwich. I just haven't heard someone say sandwich in a very long time.
I've never heard anyone say sandwich.
Well, I remember people saying sandwich when I was at school, but it's sandwich.
Weren't they educated to speak properly? It's just a sandwich.
Well, right. Would you like to take it up with Idris Elba?
Well, if he comes...
My money's on Idris, frankly. Yeah.
Well, I'm not suggesting I'm going to have a fight over it.
No, okay, fine. So, anyway, I like the fact that he says language. So, directed by Hani Abu-Assad, who made Paradise Now. So, at the beginning of the film, there is this spectacular plane crash in which the back end of the plane gets torn off. And it reminded me very much of the plane crash from Alive, in which exactly the same thing happens. I mean, a much larger plane, obviously, in which you're in the plane and you literally see the back of it get torn off. I remember when Alive first came out, saying, well, whatever else you think about the film, that is the most spectacular plane crash. And there is a much smaller but sort of referential version of that. And then, after that spectacular plane crash, which flags up Alive, they're on the side of the mountain and they don't have food and they're in snow and no one knows where they are. The film is described on its wiki page as a romance disaster survival film. And I was...
That's all right.
Yeah, I remember being halfway through it when I went, you know what it is? It's Alive, actually. It's a film... Come on.
It's not bad.
Come on. Thank you very much. So it's based on the novel by Chris Martin, and Winslet and Elba are exactly as good as you'd expect them to be. They're both very, very accomplished, actors, and they've both got charisma to spare. And it is essentially a two-hander because the film is about them, and it's about... what happens to characters in extremis.
So they find they have more in common than they originally...
They find they have more in common than they originally thought. And they also find that in that, in that isolated circumstance, everything else about their lives sort of ceases to impinge because they're basically in the middle of nowhere with no hope of no knowledge of whether or not they're going to get out at all. The funny thing was, the film didn't convince me, and I kept wondering why it was that I wasn't, because as I said, they're good performers, because it's directed well, because it's a story which is not without its interesting points. And I think the problem with it is this: firstly, it did seem oddly mechanical, because I never actually believed that the characters were as endangered as their circumstance meant to say. They look like they're in pretty good condition despite the terrible circumstances that they're in. There are a couple of action sequences that, although well executed, do seem to be sort of slightly bolted on. I mean, there's a there's a moment of threat with an animal attack, which is in itself, a perfectly well played out sequence, but did seem like something which you put in there because otherwise things are going to grind to a halt. But the most bizarre thing is that for most of the movie, the film tries to strike this balance between being a disaster movie, a survival movie, and something else. And then at a key moment, it sort of gives up the ghost and does something which is.
Will we all know that moment?
Yeah, you will, and it's fairly late on in the film, and it's odd because I kept thinking all the way through, I'm almost with this. I'm almost going with it, but I'm not, I'm just not quite buying it. I'm not quite buying the circumstance. I mean, at one point I wondered whether it's because I know them as performers too well, but I thought that's absolutely nonsense because I've seen loads of films in which I believe that Kate Winslet is all the characters that she plays. I've seen loads of films in which I believe that Idris Elba is all the characters that he plays. So it's odd. It is well performed and yet fundamentally has an engagement problem. And once Alive actually had come into my head, I could never quite throw that off.
You might actually have spoilt it.
I spoiled my own film.
For a number of people. Well, people haven't actually. They're just thinking, what are we going to see? Well, we can't get into Blade Runner. That's all full. Let's go and see The Mountain Between Us. And then someone will chip in, what you mean, Alive actually? They go, oh, really? Oh, okay.